I was already being treated like a stranger at my own husband's funeral when the impossible happened. My mother-in-law had quietly pushed me to the last row, as if 22 years of marriage meant nothing. No one introduced me. No one looked my way. Then the church doors opened, and a decorated army colonel walked in with 2 uniformed soldiers. Instead of approaching Daniel's casket, he came straight toward me. He stopped, stood at attention, and gave me a flawless military salute. "Captain Susan Miller," he said softly. The silence that followed was louder than any prayer. Because in that moment, everyone realized they had buried the wrong story. If this opening touched your heart, I'd love for you to stay with me until the end. Please like this video if you believe respect should never be judged by appearances, and subscribe if stories about family sacrifice and second chances speak to you. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd truly love to know who's sharing this journey with me today. My name is Susan Miller, and before the day of my husband's funeral, most people would have described me with one simple word: ordinary. I suppose I helped create that impression. I never talked about my past. I never corrected people when they assumed I had spent my entire life working in small-town clinics. I never felt the need to prove anything. Daniel used to smile whenever someone underestimated me. "They don't need to know everything," he would whisper while squeezing my hand. "They'll never believe it anyway." I would laugh, and we'd leave the conversation behind. That was Daniel Carter. Quiet, kind. The type of man who fixed a neighbor's broken fence before fixing his own. The type who shoveled snow from an elderly widow's driveway before sunrise without telling anyone. The type who believed good deeds only counted if nobody applauded. People in our town knew him as a retired mechanic. Only a handful knew he had once worn the uniform of an Army Ranger. Even fewer knew what that really meant. When we met years after leaving the military, neither of us introduced ourselves with old titles. He wasn't Sergeant First Class Daniel Carter. I wasn't Captain Susan Miller. We were simply 2 people trying to build peaceful lives after carrying memories neither of us wanted to unpack. Maybe that was why we fit together so naturally. Neither of us asked questions the other wasn't ready to answer. Daniel never bragged about the medals locked inside an old cedar box in our closet. I never mentioned the photographs buried inside another box under our bed. Some chapters belonged to the past. We agreed to leave them there. We married later than most couples. I was 54. Daniel was 57. Neither of us had children. Life had taken us down different roads before bringing us together. Some people thought our marriage looked boring. I thought it looked peaceful. Every morning, Daniel made coffee before I woke up. Every evening, we ate dinner together at the same small oak table. Sometimes, we watched old Western movies. Sometimes, we sat on the porch saying almost nothing. Silence never frightened us. We had already lived through enough noise. If you had asked me what happiness looked like, I would have pointed to those quiet evenings. Nothing spectacular. Nothing expensive. Just 2 tired souls grateful to have found each other. Unfortunately, not everyone shared that happiness. Daniel's mother, Linda Carter, never accepted me. She was polite in public, cold in private. The first time I met her, she looked me up and down before forcing a smile. "So, you're the woman Daniel married." Not "welcome," not "it's nice to meet you." Just that. I understood immediately. I wasn't family, not in her eyes. His younger brother, Michael Carter, followed his mother's lead. He wasn't openly cruel. He simply kept his distance. Every conversation felt like a business meeting. Short, careful, uncomfortable. His wife, Karen, didn't bother hiding her opinion. She once looked around our modest house and laughed. I thought Daniel would have done better after all those years. Daniel heard her. He only smiled. I already did. Then he wrapped his arm around me. Karen rolled her eyes. Linda changed the subject. I pretended not to notice. That became my role inside the Carter family. Pretend. Pretend I didn't hear the whispers. Pretend I didn't notice Karen asking Daniel about his finances while I was standing 3 feet away. Pretend Linda wasn't introducing me to church friends as Daniel's wife, without ever saying my name. Daniel always apologized afterward. I'm sorry. I would shake my head. They're your family. No. He would answer quietly. You're my family. Those words always made the hurt smaller. I never wanted him caught between the people who raised him and the woman he loved. So I stayed silent. Years passed that way. Peace at home, distance everywhere else. Then one ordinary Tuesday morning changed everything. Daniel was making pancakes. He was humming an old Johnny Cash song. He asked whether I wanted blueberries or chocolate chips. I teased him that pancakes didn't need to become dessert. He laughed. It was the last laugh I ever heard. Minutes later, he grabbed his chest. The mixing bowl hit the floor. Flour exploded across the kitchen. At first, I thought he had slipped. Then I saw his face. As a nurse, I recognized the signs immediately. I called 911 while beginning CPR. My hands moved automatically. Years of training took over. I counted compressions. I listened for breathing. I begged him to stay with me. The paramedics arrived quickly. Too quickly. Because even before they loaded him into the ambulance, I already knew. Sometimes experience is a terrible gift. At the hospital, the doctor spoke gently. I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller. Everything after those words became a blur. Phone calls, paperwork, condolences, silence. The house suddenly felt enormous. His favorite coffee mug stayed on the counter for days because I couldn't bring myself to wash it. His reading glasses remained beside his chair. His jacket still hung by the front door. Every object carried his fingerprints. Every room carried his absence. Then Linda arrived. She hugged me for exactly 3 seconds, not because she wanted to comfort me, because people were watching. Before Daniel had even been gone 24 hours, she began discussing funeral arrangements. I'll handle everything. I nodded. I didn't have the strength to argue. By the next day, decisions were already being made without me. The church, the flowers, the guest list, the obituary. I wasn't asked. I was informed. When I suggested one of Daniel's favorite hymns, Karen smiled politely. I think we've already chosen the music. When I offered to bring one of Daniel's old military photographs for the memorial table, Michael shook his head. Most people knew him as a mechanic. I looked down. So did he. That conversation ended there. As the funeral approached, I felt like a guest attending someone else's goodbye. Linda spoke with the funeral director. Michael handled the paperwork. Karen greeted visitors. I simply sat quietly whenever they met. Nobody asked what Daniel would have wanted. Ironically, I was the only person in the room who actually knew. The night before the funeral, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through our bedroom. The moonlight rested across Daniel's old cedar chest. I almost opened it. Almost. Instead, I placed my hand on the lid. I kept our promise, I whispered. I never told them. For a long moment, the room remained silent. Then I noticed something resting on top of the chest, a plain white envelope. My name was written across the front in Daniel's familiar handwriting. Susan. Only Susan. No one else knew that letter existed. And in that moment, I had no idea that what was inside would change everything the Carter family believed about me and about the man they thought they knew. I never opened the envelope. Not that morning. Not before the funeral. I slipped it into my purse and told myself I would read it when I could think clearly. Right then, I wasn't thinking at all. I was simply surviving. The drive to the church felt much longer than 15 minutes. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. Daniel always loved rainy mornings. They remind people to slow down, he used to say. I wished the world would slow down now. Instead, everything kept moving without him. Cars filled the church parking lot before I arrived. Friends, neighbors, former co-workers, people Daniel had quietly helped over the years. Many of them smiled sadly when they saw me. "I'm so sorry, Susan. He was one of the good ones. We're praying for you." Their kindness kept me standing. Then I stepped inside. Linda was already directing people like she was organizing a charity banquet instead of burying her son. "Flowers go over there. Family sits in the first 2 rows. Please sign the guest book." She barely looked at me. Michael was speaking with the funeral director. Karen adjusted flower arrangements, making sure every ribbon pointed in the same direction. Everything looked perfect. Except me. I walked toward the front pew. Before I could sit down, Karen blocked my way. Her smile looked pleasant. Her eyes didn't. "Oh, Susan. I think these seats are reserved." I looked around. "There are empty spaces." She nodded. "Immediate family." The words stung more than I expected. I wanted to remind her I had shared 22 years with Daniel. I wanted to tell her I had held his hand through surgeries. I wanted to tell her I had heard his last heartbeat. Instead, I simply asked, "Where would you like me to sit?" Karen pointed toward the last row. "There should be plenty of room back there." For a moment, no one spoke. Several people nearby heard the conversation. They looked uncomfortable. No one interrupted. I walked to the back. Every step felt heavier than the last. As I sat down alone, I stared at Daniel's casket. A polished American flag rested across it. He would have hated all this attention. He never wanted ceremonies. He wanted peace. People slowly filled the sanctuary. I noticed several older veterans wearing small military pins. One man walked with a cane. Another carried a folded campaign cap beneath his arm. They stopped briefly near the casket before taking their seats. None of them recognized me. That didn't surprise me. More than 20 years had passed since either Daniel or I wore a uniform. Time changes faces. It doesn't always erase memories. The organ music began. The minister stepped forward. Everyone stood. Just before he spoke, the heavy wooden doors opened once again. Every head turned. 3 soldiers entered wearing immaculate dress uniforms. Their medals reflected the stained glass light. Walking between them was an older man with silver hair and the straight posture only decades of military service could create. Colonel James Whitmore. Even after all these years, I recognized him instantly. His hair was grayer, his face carried deeper lines, but his eyes were exactly the same. Sharp, calm, always observing. For one impossible second, I forgot where I was. Afghanistan flashed across my mind. Dust, helicopters, radio calls, long nights. Then reality returned. Colonel Whitmore paused near Daniel's casket. Everyone expected him to stop there. Instead, he continued walking, straight down the center aisle. His polished shoes echoed through the silent church. Tap, tap, tap. People watched curiously. Linda smiled politely, assuming he was coming toward the family. Michael even stood up halfway. The colonel never looked at them. He walked past the front pew, past the second row, past every guest, toward me. I slowly stood. Neither of us spoke. He stopped exactly 2 feet away. Then with perfect precision, Colonel Whitmore came to attention. His right hand rose sharply. A flawless military salute. Every muscle in my body reacted before my mind could. Instinct, training, respect. I returned the salute. Only then did he lower his hand. His voice was quiet, but inside that silent church, everyone heard him. Captain Susan Miller. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I saw Linda's face drain of color. Karen frowned in confusion. Michael stared at me as though he had never seen me before. Whispers spread across the room. Captain? Did he say captain? She served? The veterans sitting near the front looked from the colonel to me. One elderly Marine slowly stood. Then another veteran rose beside him. Without saying a word, they both straightened their backs. Respect, recognized respect. Colonel Whitmore offered a small smile. "It's good to see you again, Captain," I answered quietly. "I wish it were under different circumstances, sir." "So do I." He looked toward Daniel's casket. "He was a remarkable soldier." "He was." The colonel's expression softened. "And you were exactly where he always said you would be." I didn't answer, because I knew what Daniel had told him. He had always believed I would stand beside him until the very end, even now, especially now. Behind us, the whispers grew louder. Karen leaned toward Linda. I could almost hear her. "What is happening?" Linda shook her head. "I don't know." Michael finally walked toward us. His face showed disbelief. "I'm sorry." He looked directly at the colonel. "I think there must be some mistake." Colonel Whitmore turned slowly. "There is no mistake." "My sister-in-law—" Michael hesitated. "She's retired nurse." The colonel nodded once. "She certainly is." Michael looked relieved. Then the colonel continued, "And one of the finest Army officers I ever had the privilege of serving beside." The relief disappeared instantly. Michael blinked. What Colonel Whitmore didn't raise his voice. Captain Susan Miller served with extraordinary distinction. Silence. Complete silence. Karen laughed nervously. "I'm sure there are lots of Susan Millers." The colonel looked directly into her eyes. "Only one Captain Susan Miller served under my command." No one had another response. I wanted the floor to open beneath me. This wasn't what Daniel and I had wanted. We had buried those years long ago. We had promised never to wear our service like a badge in everyday life. We wanted to be ordinary. Nothing more, nothing less. Colonel Whitmore seemed to read my thoughts. He leaned closer. "So he never told them?" I shook my head. "We agreed." The colonel sighed. He knew this day might come. My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, the minister approached us carefully. "Colonel Whitmore, we're about to begin." The colonel nodded politely. "Of course." Then he turned back to me one last time. "I have something Daniel asked me to bring." He gently touched the inside pocket of his dress jacket. "It cannot wait much longer." My pulse quickened. Another letter. Another secret. How much had Daniel prepared before he died? As Colonel Whitmore walked toward the front of the church, every pair of eyes followed him. Then they turned toward me. For the first time since entering the building, no one looked at me with pity. They looked at me with questions. And before the funeral was over, every one of those questions would be answered. As Colonel Whitmore returned to the front of the church, I remained frozen in the last pew. Every eye stayed on me. It was the kind of silence that only exists after a truth no one expected. I wanted to disappear. Instead, my mind drifted backward. More than 25 years, to another world, a world of sand helicopters and impossible choices. Back then, I wasn't Susan Miller. I was Captain Susan Miller of the United States Army Nurse Corps. People often hear the word nurse and imagine clean hospital rooms. That wasn't my reality. Our hospital had canvas walls. The operating room shook every time artillery landed nearby. Blood stained our boots before breakfast. Every day began with uncertainty. Every night ended with exhaustion. I was 32 when I arrived in Afghanistan. Young enough to believe training prepared you for war. Old enough to learn it never could. My job sounded simple. Keep people alive. In reality, it meant making impossible decisions within seconds. Who needed surgery first? Who could wait? Who couldn't be saved? Those decisions never left me. One afternoon, helicopters landed almost nonstop. Stretchers covered the landing zone. Explosions echoed somewhere beyond the mountains. The radio operator shouted casualty numbers faster than anyone could write them down. I remember washing blood from my hands. 5 minutes later, they were covered again. War never pauses because you're tired. It only asks how much more you can give. That was where I first saw Daniel. He wasn't introducing himself. He wasn't smiling. He was carrying a wounded soldier over his shoulders. Dust covered his uniform. Blood covered his gloves. His face remained perfectly calm. "Medic!" someone yelled. I ran toward him. Together we lowered the injured ranger onto a stretcher. Daniel never let go until he knew the man was breathing. Only then did he step back. "Will he make it?" That was the first sentence he ever spoke to me. I answered honestly. "I don't know." He nodded once. "Do everything you can." Then he disappeared without another word. I learned his name later. Sergeant First Class Daniel Carter, Army Rangers, highly respected, never talked about himself, always volunteered for the hardest assignments. Within weeks, I noticed something else. Every wounded soldier trusted him. Every officer respected him. Even the toughest men became quieter when Daniel entered the room. Not because they feared him. Because they believed him. That kind of respect can't be ordered. It has to be earned. Weeks turned into months. Our paths crossed often. Sometimes he brought injured soldiers. Sometimes I cleared his team before dangerous missions. Most conversations lasted less than 2 minutes. "Take care of them." "I will." "Stay safe." "You too." That was enough. Friendships formed differently in a combat zone. Nobody wasted words. Every goodbye carried the possibility of being the last. One evening, I found Daniel sitting alone outside the medical tent. The desert sky was unusually clear. Thousands of stars filled the darkness. He held an unopened letter. "You okay?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "My mom keeps asking when I'll come home." I sat beside him. "What do you tell her?" "The truth." "And what's that?" "I don't know if I will." Neither of us spoke after that. There wasn't anything else to say. The next morning, he left on another mission. 3 days later, he returned with cuts across his face. One of his teammates had died. Daniel never mentioned the details. He simply asked whether another wounded ranger would survive. His concern was always someone else, never himself. That quality drew people toward him, including me. Months passed. The base became our entire world. Morning briefings, medical rounds, emergency surgeries, incoming helicopters, outgoing patrols. Somehow inside all that chaos, Daniel and I built something that looked almost like friendship. One afternoon, he handed me a paper cup of coffee. "It's terrible," he warned. I laughed after the first sip. "It is terrible. But it's hot." That's about the highest compliment Army coffee can earn. That became a small tradition. Whenever our schedules crossed, one of us found coffee. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we simply shared 5 quiet minutes before returning to work. Those moments mattered. They reminded us we were still human. Colonel Whitmore noticed before either of us did. He called me into his office one morning. "Captain." "Sir?" "You've been working too many hours?" "I can manage." "I know you can." He leaned back. "So can Sergeant Carter." I looked at him confused. "I'm not following, sir." He smiled. "The two of you keep covering shifts for each other." I felt my face warm. "We're just helping." "I know." He paused. "Keep helping." Then he dismissed me. That was Colonel Whitmore. He noticed everything. He just didn't always say it. Late that fall, intelligence reports began changing. Insurgent activity increased across the province. Convoys were attacked more often. Medical evacuation helicopters couldn't always reach wounded soldiers. Our jobs became even more dangerous. Then came the briefing that changed everything. Every senior officer attended. Maps covered the walls. Satellite photographs lay across the conference table. Colonel Whitmore pointed toward a remote valley. "Reconnaissance indicates multiple civilian families trapped here." Silence filled the room. Another officer spoke. "The nearest medical support is over 60 miles away." Colonel Whitmore looked directly at me. "Captain Miller." "Yes, sir." "I need a forward trauma team." I already knew what he was asking. "We'll establish a temporary treatment station." "Exactly." Then he turned toward Daniel. "Sergeant Carter." "Sir?" "Your Rangers will provide security." Daniel answered immediately. "Understood." After the meeting ended, he caught up with me outside. "You know this one feels different." "I know. The intelligence isn't complete. It never is." He hesitated. "If things go bad," I interrupted. "They won't." He smiled. "You've always been optimistic." "No," I answered quietly. "I've just never liked goodbye conversations." For the first time since we'd met, Daniel laughed. "Fair enough." Then his expression became serious again. "I'll make you one promise." "What's that?" "If you're out there," he looked straight into my eyes, "I'll bring everyone home." At the time, I believed he meant the civilians, the medics, his team. All of us. I had no idea those simple words would soon become the promise that nearly cost him everything. Because the mission waiting for us in that remote Afghan valley would force Daniel Carter to choose between obeying direct military orders or saving my life. And that choice would follow both of us long after the war ended. We left before sunrise. Our convoy stretched across the desert like a line of shadows. 2 armored vehicles in front. My medical truck in the middle. Daniel's ranger team spread around us, watching every ridge and every abandoned building. No one talked much. Before mission, silence was normal. Everyone saved their energy for whatever waited ahead. I sat beside Staff Sergeant Emily Brooks, my senior combat medic. She checked our supplies for the 3rd time. Blood bags, IV fluids, bandages, morphine. Everything had its place. She looked at me and smiled. "Nervous?" "A little." "Good." She laughed softly. "The day you stop being nervous is the day you become dangerous." She was right. Fear kept people alive. Confidence without fear got them killed. By late morning, we reached the small valley. The village looked almost deserted. Several damaged houses stood among dry fields. Children peeked from broken windows. An elderly man waved weakly as we arrived. Colonel Whitmore's intelligence had been correct. The civilians desperately needed medical care. We immediately established a temporary treatment station inside an abandoned school building. Daniel's Rangers secured the perimeter. My team began treating patients. The first hours went smoothly. A little girl with pneumonia, an old farmer with an infected leg, a pregnant woman suffering from dehydration. Simple cases, nothing we couldn't handle. For a moment, I believed the mission might actually be routine. Then, the radio crackled. One of Daniel's men shouted, "Movement on the eastern ridge!" Every soldier reached for a weapon. Daniel ran outside. I followed him to the doorway. "What do you see?" He raised his binoculars. "Too far," another voice came over the radio. "Possible armed contacts." Daniel looked at me. "You stay inside." "I have patience." "I know." "If shooting starts, I'll stay down." He nodded once, then he sprinted toward his team. Minutes later, the first explosion shook the building. Glass shattered. Children screamed. Dust filled the hallway. The attack had begun. Insurgents fired from several directions. Automatic gunfire echoed across the valley. Daniel's Rangers answered immediately. The radio became a storm of voices. "Contact left. Cover the west side. Medic." I grabbed my trauma bag. Emily followed me. Outside, one ranger lay behind a damaged truck. A bullet had torn through his thigh. We crawled toward him while bullets struck the dirt around us. Emily applied a tourniquet. I started an IV. The soldier grabbed my sleeve. "Don't leave me." "We're not leaving." Another explosion erupted nearby. Someone shouted that more enemies were moving in. Daniel appeared from behind a wall. "Captain, we have to move. 2 more wounded inside." "I'll cover you." He fired several controlled bursts before motioning us forward. We dragged the injured ranger toward the school. The hallway quickly filled with wounded soldiers and frightened civilians. There weren't enough hands. There was never enough time. An hour passed. Then another. The attack only intensified. Colonel Whitmore radioed from headquarters. Evacuation helicopters delayed. Weather had changed. No aircraft could reach us. We were completely alone. Then everything went wrong. A second explosion collapsed part of the school roof. Several civilians became trapped beneath broken concrete. Without thinking, I rushed toward them. Emily grabbed my arm. "Captain, it's unstable." "I know." Children were crying beneath the rubble. I couldn't ignore them. Neither could she. Together we crawled inside. We lifted broken beams, moved bricks, pulled 2 children free, then a third. The final civilian was an elderly woman trapped beneath a collapsed doorway. As we reached her, another blast shook the building. The ceiling cracked above us. Emily looked up. "We need to go, not without her." Together, we freed the woman. Then the wall collapsed behind us. Dust swallowed everything. For several terrifying seconds I couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't hear. When the dust settled, my radio was dead. The exit had disappeared beneath debris. We were trapped. Outside, Daniel kept fighting. He had no idea where I was, or maybe he did. Because minutes later, I heard distant shouting. Someone was calling my name. "Susan?" Again. "Susan, Daniel," I yelled back. "We're here." The collapsed wall muffled my voice. Emily coughed beside me. "We won't last long." Smoke drifted through the broken ceiling. The building groaned around us. Outside, gunfire continued. Then Daniel's voice came again. Closer this time. "I found them." Relief flooded me. It lasted only seconds. Another voice shouted through the rubble. "Sergeant Carter, fall back. We have orders." I froze. That order came from Lieutenant Harris. The Rangers had been instructed to retreat to a stronger defensive position. If Daniel stayed, his entire squad could become trapped. If he left, Emily, the civilians, and I would almost certainly die. The radio outside crackled loudly enough for me to hear. "Carter, that's an order." Several seconds passed, no answer. Then I heard Daniel. Calm, steady. "I can't comply." The lieutenant sounded furious. "Repeat. My medic team is still inside. You'll lose your squad." "I understand. You have your orders." Daniel answered with words I have never forgotten. "My first order is to bring my people home." Silence. Then running footsteps. Heavy impacts against broken concrete. Voices shouting. The Rangers had ignored the retreat. They were digging. One pair of hands became 4. 4 became 8. Chunks of concrete disappeared one after another. Sunlight finally broke through. Daniel reached inside. "I've got you." He pulled the elderly woman out first, then Emily. Finally, he reached for me. At that exact moment, another explosion erupted only yards away. The blast threw both of us backward. Pain exploded through my shoulder. Daniel hit the ground hard. A steel fragment tore into his left shoulder. Blood covered his sleeve almost instantly. "Still." He stood again. "You okay?" I stared at him. "You're bleeding." "I'm asking about you." "I'm fine." "Liar." He smiled despite the pain. "So are you." The Rangers carried everyone toward the convoy. The retreat became a running battle. Bullets struck vehicles, smoke filled the valley. We loaded every civilian we could, every wounded soldier. No one was left behind. Hours later, we finally reached the forward operating base. Only then did Daniel collapse. Doctors removed the metal fragment from his shoulder. The injury permanently damaged nerves. He never fully regained strength in that arm. When Colonel Whitmore visited the hospital the next morning, his face revealed everything. The mission had succeeded. The civilians survived. Most of our team survived, but 3 soldiers from another unit had been killed covering our withdrawal. Daniel blamed himself immediately. "If I'd obeyed..." Colonel Whitmore stopped him. "If you'd obeyed..." He looked directly at me. "Captain Miller wouldn't be alive." Daniel never answered. He simply looked away. That day, everyone called him a hero. Everyone except Daniel Carter. Because from that moment forward, he believed the lives he saved could never outweigh the lives that had been lost. And that belief became the burden he carried for the rest of his life. The church was so quiet that I could hear the rain striking the stained glass windows. Colonel James Whitmore stood beside Daniel's casket with one hand resting on a folded envelope. No one spoke. Not the minister, not Linda, not Michael, not even Karen. Everyone sensed that something important was about to happen. The minister cleared his throat. "Colonel Whitmore has asked to share a few words." He stepped away from the podium. The colonel looked across the sanctuary before speaking. "I have attended too many military funerals." His voice was calm. "I've buried young soldiers. I've buried old friends. I've buried heroes who never believed they were heroes." He turned toward Daniel's flag-covered casket. Daniel Carter belonged to that last group. Several veterans lowered their heads. The colonel continued. "Most of you knew Daniel as a quiet mechanic. He preferred it that way. He never wanted applause. He never wanted recognition. He wanted peace." I smiled through tears. That sounded exactly like Daniel. Then Colonel Whitmore slowly lifted the envelope. Several months ago, Daniel contacted me. My heart tightened. He told me his health was failing. He asked me to keep something safe. Linda frowned. Michael looked confused. Karen crossed her arms. The colonel continued. He said there might come a day when certain truths could no longer remain hidden. He looked directly at me. He instructed me to reveal them only if Captain Susan Miller agreed. The room turned toward me again. Or if circumstances made silence unfair. My chest felt heavy. Daniel had planned this. Somehow he knew. The colonel carefully unfolded the letter. The words I'm about to read are Daniel's. He paused, then began. If you're hearing this, it means I've already said goodbye. Several people quietly wiped away tears. I've never been good at speeches. I've always believed actions matter more than words. So if this letter exists, it's because there are things I can no longer leave unsaid. I lowered my eyes. I could almost hear Daniel reading it himself. The colonel continued. First, to my wife. Susan, you spent years protecting my peace. You carried memories as heavy as mine. You never asked the world to thank you. You never asked anyone to know who you really were. You gave up recognition because you knew I needed an ordinary life. My vision blurred. That had been true. After leaving the army, we made a promise. No interviews, no military reunions, no stories, no medals hanging on walls. Just life. The colonel read on. I know my family never understood you. They judged what they could see. They never saw what I saw. Linda slowly looked toward me. Her expression had changed. Confusion was giving way to guilt. The colonel's voice remained steady. The bravest person I ever served beside was not another ranger. It was Captain Susan Miller. A quiet gasp moved through the church. I closed my eyes. Please stop, Daniel. Please. The colonel continued anyway. She walked into places most people would run away from. She carried wounded soldiers while bullets landed around her. She treated strangers like family. She saved more lives than anyone will ever count. And one of those lives was mine. My hands trembled. Daniel had never said those words out loud, not once. Colonel Whitmore looked up briefly, then returned to the letter. Years ago, people wanted to give me a medal. I refused. Several people exchanged puzzled looks. Linda whispered, "What medal?" The colonel answered without looking away from the paper. Daniel was nominated for the Silver Star. A murmur swept through the sanctuary. Michael stared in disbelief. The Silver Star. Karen whispered, I've heard of that. The colonel nodded. It is awarded for extraordinary gallantry in combat. Silence returned. He continued reading. I turned it down. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because 3 men never came home from that mission. I could never celebrate while their families were grieving. Tears rolled down my cheeks. That guilt had haunted Daniel every single day. No amount of reassurance ever changed it. Colonel Whitmore paused again before continuing. I also refused because people kept calling me a hero. They were looking at the wrong person. If anyone deserved recognition, it was Susan. My breathing became uneven. This wasn't how we agreed. We promised. We buried the past. Yet Daniel had chosen differently. Not for himself, for me. The colonel looked toward the congregation. I can personally confirm every word. I was there. Then he folded the letter halfway. There is one final request. The church became perfectly still. Daniel's words echoed once more. If Susan chooses to stay silent after I'm gone, respect her. If she chooses to tell the truth, respect her. The decision belongs to her. Always. No one moved. No one spoke. The colonel carefully folded the letter again. Then he stepped away from the podium. The minister quietly returned. Before he could continue the service, Linda slowly stood. She looked completely different. The confidence she'd carried all morning had disappeared. Her hands shook. Susan. Her voice barely came out. You. She couldn't finish. For the first time since Daniel and I married, she didn't know what to say. Neither did I. Then Karen broke the silence. I still don't understand. Her tone wasn't cruel this time, only confused. If all this is true, she looked between me and the colonel. Why didn't anyone ever tell us? That question lingered in the air. Everyone wanted the answer. I slowly stood. For the first time that morning, I walked toward the front of the church. Nobody stopped me. Nobody redirected me. I stood beside Daniel's casket. My hand rested gently on the folded flag. Then I answered, because Daniel didn't want people remembering the worst years of his life. I looked toward Linda. He wanted you to know your son, not your soldier. Then I faced Karen. And I never wanted anyone thanking me for doing my job. The room remained silent. I continued quietly. We didn't hide the truth because we were ashamed. We hid it because we were trying to heal. Several veterans nodded. They understood. Healing often required silence. Colonel Whitmore stepped beside me again. There is something else. He reached inside his dress jacket. Another envelope. Smaller this time. He handed it directly to me. Daniel asked me to give you this. Only after the first letter was read. I recognized Daniel's handwriting immediately. Just one word. Susan. Exactly like the envelope waiting inside my purse at home. 2 letters. Not one. My heartbeat quickened. How many messages had my husband left behind? I looked at Colonel Whitmore. When did he give you this? 3 weeks before he passed. What did he say? The colonel smiled sadly. He said, she'll know when it's time. I stared at the unopened envelope. Somehow, I already knew. Whatever was inside would change far more than my future. It would change everything the Carter family believed about Daniel and everything they believed about me. No one left after the service ended. People gathered in small groups throughout the church, but no one talked about the weather or flowers anymore. They talked about me. I could feel their eyes following every step I took. Some looked curious. Some looked embarrassed. A few looked ashamed. I stood beside Daniel's casket, gently tracing the edge of the folded flag. I wanted one quiet moment with my husband. Instead, I heard Karen's voice behind me. I don't believe it. She wasn't whispering. She wanted everyone to hear. I turned slowly. Karen folded her arms. I'm sorry, but this doesn't make sense. She looked toward Colonel Whitmore. People can say anything at a funeral. The room became silent again. Michael looked uncomfortable. Karen? She ignored him. We've never seen a single military photo. Never saw a uniform. Never heard one story. Then she looked directly at me. And suddenly, she's some kind of war hero. The word hero made me flinch. I hated it. Before I could answer, Colonel Whitmore stepped forward. Mrs. Carter. Karen lifted her chin. Yes. You have every right to ask questions. She nodded confidently. I do. And you'll receive answers. The colonel reached into a leather document case one of the soldiers had been carrying. He removed a thick military folder. Dark green. Official. Stamped with Department of the Army markings. Even from several feet away, I recognized it. My service record. My stomach tightened. Daniel really had prepared everything. Colonel Whitmore placed the folder on a nearby table. I requested permission to bring these documents. He looked around the room. They have recently been cleared for release. Karen laughed softly. Anyone can print papers. The colonel didn't react. Instead, he removed the first page. Captain Susan Elaine Miller. Army Nurse Corps. Service number? He stopped. No need to read that. Several veterans quietly moved closer. They recognized official military paperwork immediately. Michael looked uncertain. Linda remained perfectly still. The colonel continued. Commissioned officer. Combat trauma specialist. Multiple overseas deployments. He placed another document beside it. Performance evaluations. Another. Operational commendations. Another. Medical command assignments. Every page carried official signatures, military seals, dates. There was no room for doubt. Karen's confidence faded. Still, she wasn't ready to stop. That proves she served. She pointed toward me. It doesn't prove everything else. The colonel nodded calmly. Fair observation. Then he opened another folder. This one was thinner. Inside were mission reports. Some pages contained blacked-out sections. Others remained fully visible. He carefully chose one. This report concerns Operation Cedar Valley. My heart skipped. I hadn't seen that report in decades. Colonel Whitmore held it where everyone could see. The commanding medical officer? He looked directly at the page. Captain Susan Miller. Michael frowned. What does that mean? It means, the colonel replied, she commanded every medical decision made during that mission. Michael blinked. She was in charge? Yes, Karen interrupted. But Daniel was a ranger. He was. So he outranked her. The colonel shook his head. Not during medical operations? Karen looked confused. I quietly answered. When soldiers entered my treatment zone, their lives became my responsibility. And everyone, regardless of unit, followed medical command. Michael slowly turned toward me. You mean, I nodded. Daniel followed my orders. The word sounded strange, even to me, because Daniel had never made me feel powerful, only respected. Colonel Whitmore added quietly, many times. The church grew even quieter. Karen shook her head. No. I don't believe Daniel would take orders from... She stopped herself before finishing. From a woman. Everyone understood what she meant. Colonel Whitmore certainly did. His voice became firmer. Mrs. Carter. I commanded hundreds of soldiers. The best leaders followed the person most qualified. Your brother-in-law understood that. He never once questioned Captain Miller's authority. I watched Michael lower his eyes. For the first time all day, he looked genuinely unsettled. The colonel continued sorting through the documents. Then he removed one final page. A citation. Unlike the others, this one carried a gold seal. I was hoping not to read this. He looked toward me. I gave the smallest nod. Go ahead. If Daniel wanted the truth known, I wouldn't stop it anymore. Colonel Whitmore began. For exceptionally meritorious service while exposed to direct enemy fire. I recognized every word. I had tried to forget them. Captain Susan Miller repeatedly entered unstable structures to rescue wounded personnel and civilians despite significant personal risk. Her leadership directly resulted in the survival of 23 individuals. Her courage reflected the highest traditions of military service. He folded the paper. This citation accompanied her recommendation for the Bronze Star Medal. Several people gasped. Linda covered her mouth. Michael stared at me. You received a Bronze Star. I nodded once. Years ago. A lifetime ago. Karen whispered. Why didn't anyone know? I answered honestly. Because I never told anyone. But why? Because medals don't heal nightmares. No one spoke. That answer settled over the room like rain. Colonel Whitmore looked around slowly. I've served for nearly 40 years. I've met extraordinary soldiers. I've buried extraordinary soldiers. He turned toward me. Captain Miller belongs among the finest I've ever known. I wanted to disappear. Instead, an elderly man approached. He had been sitting near the front earlier, the Marine with the cane. He stopped before me. Without saying a word, he raised his hand. A salute. Slow. Perfect. I immediately returned it. When he lowered his hand, tears filled his eyes. My daughter served. He smiled sadly. Thank you. He walked away before I could answer. Another veteran stepped forward. Then another. No speeches, no applause, just silent respect. Each salute hurt more than the last. Not because I disliked them. Because Daniel should have been standing beside me. He belonged here too. As the final veteran returned to his seat, Michael finally spoke. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Susan. I looked at him. Did Daniel really follow your orders? I smiled softly. Sometimes. Michael looked almost amused. I can't imagine that. I laughed through my tears. Oh, he argued plenty. Several people smiled for the first time that day. But once decisions were made, he never hesitated. Michael nodded slowly. He always respected people who earned it. He did. Then Linda finally found the courage to ask the question she'd been avoiding. Susan, did my son ever tell you that he was proud of you? I looked toward Daniel's casket. Every memory flooded back. The coffee, the porch, the pancakes, the promises. I smiled. Every single day. Linda closed her eyes. A tear rolled down her cheek. Across the room, Karen remained silent. She wasn't convinced. Not completely. I could see it in her face. She believed the records, she believed the medals, but she still thought there was something missing. Something she hadn't seen. She had no idea she was right. Because the greatest secret Daniel left behind wasn't inside those military files. It was waiting inside the second envelope, still resting in my hand. And before the day was over, its contents would reveal a truth none of us had expected. I did not open Daniel's second letter inside the church. Too many people were watching. Too many emotions had already been exposed. I placed the envelope carefully inside my purse beside the one I had found at home and turned toward Colonel Whitmore. Is there somewhere private we can talk? He nodded. The pastor offered us his office. Linda immediately stepped forward. I'm coming too. Michael joined her. Karen followed without asking. A few minutes later, the five of us sat inside a cramped office behind the sanctuary. Rain tapped against the narrow window. A wooden cross hung above the pastor's desk. No one seemed comfortable. Colonel Whitmore placed the military files on the desk between us. Linda stared at them as if they belonged to a stranger. My son never told me any of this. Her voice held pain, but also accusation. I answered gently. Daniel wasn't trying to punish you. Then why hide it? Because every time he spoke about the war, he returned there. Linda looked down. He used to wake up screaming when he first came home. I had never known that. She continued. He wouldn't tell me what he saw. He said he was fine. Michael gave a bitter laugh. That was Daniel's favorite lie. Colonel Whitmore leaned forward. Your brother carried significant survivor's guilt. Michael looked at him. Because of those 3 soldiers? Yes. The colonel opened the mission folder again. Daniel believed his decision caused their deaths. Linda's face tightened. Did it? The colonel did not rush his answer. No. Everyone looked at him. He pointed to a section of the report. The 3 soldiers were killed while defending the western evacuation route. Their position had already come under attack before Sergeant Carter refused the withdrawal order. His decision did not place them there. Michael frowned. Then why did Daniel blame himself? Their position had already come under attack before Sergeant Carter refused the withdrawal order. His decision did not place them there. Michael frowned. Then why did Daniel blame himself? Because grief does not always follow facts. I understood that better than anyone. For years, Daniel replayed the mission in his mind. He changed small details, invented different choices, created endings where everyone survived. But war did not offer clean endings, only survivors and questions. Karen remained near the door. Her arms were still folded, but her voice had softened. So Susan received the Bronze Star. Colonel Whitmore nodded. She did, and Daniel was nominated for the Silver Star. Yes, but he refused it. Yes. Karen looked at me. Did you refuse yours too? No. The answer surprised her. I continued. I accepted it because my commanding officer told me the citation belonged to the entire medical team. Colonel Whitmore smiled slightly. That commanding officer was me. I remembered that conversation clearly. I had stood inside his office angry and exhausted. I don't want a medal, sir. It isn't only yours. Colonel Whitmore smiled slightly. That commanding officer was me. I remembered that conversation clearly. I had stood inside his office angry and exhausted. I don't want a medal, sir. It isn't only yours. I did my job. So did every person whose name appears in this report. He had pushed the medal box toward me. Accepting honor is not the same as seeking attention. In the end, I accepted it. Then I locked it away and rarely looked at it again. Colonel Whitmore removed several photographs from the folder. The first showed my medical team standing beside a helicopter. Our uniforms were covered in dust. Everyone looked exhausted. The second showed Daniel's Ranger unit. He stood in the back row, younger, stronger, serious even then. Linda reached for the picture. Her fingers touched Daniel's face. I've never seen this. He didn't keep many photographs, I said. He kept this one, Colonel Whitmore replied. He turned the image over. A sentence was written across the back in Daniel's handwriting. The people who brought us home. Linda's eyes filled with tears. The colonel placed another photograph beside it. This one showed Daniel and me sitting on ammunition crates, each holding a paper cup of coffee. Neither of us faced the camera. We had been talking. I had forgotten anyone took that picture. Michael studied it closely. You knew each other long before you married? Yes. How long? Nearly 10 years before we saw each other again. Karen looked confused. You lost contact after we returned home? Daniel had left the army first. His shoulder never fully recovered. The nerve damage ended his military career. I remained in service several more years before retiring. Our lives separated. Then nearly a decade later, we met again at a veterans medical center in Richmond. He was waiting for a physical therapy appointment. I was volunteering in a rehabilitation program. He looked at me across the hallway and said, "That coffee was still terrible." I laughed before I cried. 6 months later, we were inseparable. 1 year after that, we married. Linda stared at me. "Why didn't Daniel tell us how you met?" "He wanted our marriage to begin in the present." Colonel Whitmore gathered the photographs. "There is another reason these records remained hidden." I looked at him. "What reason?" "The mission report was classified. I knew parts of it had been restricted. I did not know how much." He opened a newly released document. Operation Cedar Valley was not only a civilian rescue. The room became still. "What else was it?" Michael asked. "The medical station provided cover for the evacuation of an Afghan interpreter and his family." I remembered them. A father, a mother, 2 children. They had arrived among the wounded civilians. No names were used. No questions were asked. Colonel Whitmore continued. That interpreter had provided intelligence that saved numerous American lives. If his identity had become public, his relatives would have been targeted. That is why Captain Miller and Sergeant Carter were instructed never to discuss the mission. Karen finally moved closer. So their silence protected someone. Yes. The colonel looked at me, and Daniel continued protecting people long after he returned home. Something in his tone changed. I noticed it immediately. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated. "I believed you knew." Knew what? Colonel Whitmore glanced toward Linda and Michael. Then back at me. "Daniel contacted me several times over the years." "That isn't unusual." "No, but the reason was..." He reached deeper into the document case and removed a plain brown folder. Unlike the military files, it carried no official seal. Only Daniel's handwriting. "Carter family." Linda leaned forward. "What is that?" "I don't know," I said. For once, I truly didn't. Colonel Whitmore handed the folder to me. Inside were bank records, loan agreements, receipts, copies of checks. The earliest document was nearly 18 years old. The newest was dated only 4 months before Daniel died. I scanned the first page, then the second. My stomach tightened. One payment had gone to Carter Auto Supply, the small business Daniel's father once owned. Another covered a large medical bill in Linda's name. Then I found a private loan agreement connected to Michael. The amount made me stop breathing. $85,000. Michael saw the number. His face changed instantly. "Where did you get that?" I looked up. "You recognize it?" He didn't answer. Karen took the paper from my hand. Her eyes widened. "Michael." He stood abruptly. "This has nothing to do with the funeral." Linda stared at him. "What did Daniel pay?" Michael backed toward the wall. "Mom, what did your brother pay?" No one moved. No one breathed. Finally, Michael lowered his head. "My debt." Karen looked horrified. "What debt?" He closed his eyes. "The one that would have taken our house." The room fell silent. I looked down at the folder. There were dozens of records inside. Daniel had spent years helping his family. Quietly. Without credit. Without thanks. And judging by their faces, none of them knew the full truth. Colonel Whitmore spoke softly. Daniel did not only hide his service, he hid his sacrifices. I turned another page. At the bottom was a handwritten note from my husband. "If they ever learn the truth, don't let it divide them. Help them understand why I did it." My hands began to shake. Because Daniel had left me more than letters. He had left me responsibility for the family that never accepted me. And the deeper I searched through that folder, the clearer it became that every person in that room owed Daniel far more than they ever imagined. Michael stared at the loan agreement as though it belonged to someone else. His lips moved. No words came out. Linda looked from the document to her younger son. "Michael." Her voice trembled. "Tell me this isn't true." He lowered himself into a chair and covered his face with both hands. "I wanted to." Silence. "I wanted to tell you." Karen looked completely lost. "What debt?" Michael took a long breath. 15 years ago, I expanded the auto shop. I borrowed too much. The economy crashed. I couldn't make the payments." Karen stared at him. "You told me everything was under control." "I lied. You said the bank approved a restructuring." "I lied about that too." Linda whispered, "Oh, Michael." He nodded without looking up. "I was weeks away from losing the business." "And the house." Karen stepped backward until she hit the wall. "You told me we were fine. I couldn't bear to tell you the truth." Her eyes filled with tears. "So, Daniel paid it?" Michael finally looked at us. "Not all at once. He met with the bank. He refinanced the loan. He covered the missed payments. He never asked for the money back." I slowly turned another page. Every payment matched what Michael had said. Daniel had quietly transferred money for nearly 6 years, never once mentioning it to me. Or maybe he had, without telling me directly. Suddenly, I remembered all the Saturdays when he worked overtime repairing engines, the weekends spent restoring old pickup trucks, the evenings he accepted emergency repair jobs. Whenever I suggested taking a vacation, he always smiled. "Maybe next year." I thought he simply enjoyed working. Now I understood. He had been protecting his brother. Karen sank into another chair. "I had no idea." Michael looked at her with tears in his eyes. "I know. I'm sorry." She didn't answer. For the first time since I had known her, Karen looked genuinely ashamed. Linda reached for another paper. It was a hospital invoice. Her own name appeared across the top. The total exceeded $40,000. She frowned. "I don't remember paying this," I answered quietly. "Because you didn't." She looked at me. "What?" I slid the receipt toward her. "Look at the payment information." Her hands began shaking. The final line read, "Paid in full, Daniel Carter." Linda covered her mouth. "My surgery. The heart procedure." "I thought Medicare." She stopped. Tears rolled freely down her face. "It only covered part of it." Colonel Whitmore spoke softly. "Daniel paid the rest." Linda whispered, "When?" I answered, "3 years ago." She looked stunned. "But he never said anything." "No, he wouldn't." I remembered asking Daniel that same year why we had delayed replacing our old roof. He had simply shrugged. "We can live with a few leaks." We had placed buckets in the attic every time it rained. Meanwhile, he had quietly paid his mother's medical bills. I closed my eyes. How many sacrifices had I never noticed? Michael slowly flipped through more documents. Then he froze. "Dad." His voice cracked. "What about Dad?" Inside the folder rested several canceled checks made payable to Carter Auto Supply. Daniel's father's business had struggled before he passed away. I always assumed it recovered on its own. Apparently not. Michael read the notes attached to each payment: equipment repairs, payroll assistance, property taxes. Daniel had quietly saved the business more than once. Linda began crying openly. I kept telling everyone your father rebuilt the company himself. She looked toward Daniel's funeral photograph, sitting across the room. It was Daniel. Colonel Whitmore nodded. He asked me never to tell anyone. Karen looked confused again. Why would he hide something like this? I answered before anyone else could. Because he never wanted anyone to feel indebted. She stared at me. Not even family. Especially family. That was Daniel. If he gave you something, he wanted you to believe life had simply become kinder. Never that he had made it happen. Michael suddenly stood. I treated him like... He couldn't finish. His voice broke. I barely returned his calls. He'd invite us for dinner. I always said I was busy. He laughed bitterly. I wasn't busy. I was embarrassed. Linda looked at him. Embarrassed. He always seemed... Michael searched for the words. Better than me? I thought Mom loved him more. Linda immediately shook her head. No. I loved both of you. Michael smiled sadly. I know that now. But I didn't then. The room fell silent again. Karen slowly walked toward me. For the first time since we met years ago, there was no sarcasm in her face. I owe you an apology. I looked at her quietly. I judged you. I thought you were taking advantage of Daniel. She swallowed hard. It never crossed my mind that the two of you were spending your own money helping everyone else. I nodded gently. You didn't know. No. I didn't want to know. That honesty surprised me. She continued. It was easier to believe the worst. I appreciated that more than any perfect apology, because real regret rarely sounded polished. It sounded uncomfortable. Colonel Whitmore remained quiet until everyone settled again. Then he looked at me. There should be one more item. I searched the folder. Near the bottom rested a small notebook. Black leather. Worn corners. I recognized it immediately. Daniel carried it almost everywhere. Whenever I asked what he wrote inside, he'd smile. Just reminders. I had never opened it. Not once. Respect went both ways in our marriage. If he wanted privacy, I gave it to him. Now the notebook belonged to me. I slowly opened the first page. Every entry was dated. Neat handwriting, short notes, not financial records, not appointments, acts of kindness. Mrs. Henderson needs groceries. Call Frank about his chemotherapy. Send flowers to Sergeant Lewis's widow. Help Michael before Friday. Check on Mom after surgery. Fix the Johnson family's furnace. Every page looked the same. People, needs, solutions. Never once did Daniel write about himself. Linda stared over my shoulder. My goodness, she whispered. He planned everything. Another page stopped me. Savings transferred. Don't tell Susan yet. She'll worry. I smiled through tears. Of course I would have worried. Another entry followed. Roof can wait another year. Mom's health can't. I laughed softly despite everything. He really had chosen the leaking roof. Then near the final pages, I found something different. Not a reminder. A sentence. If Susan ever reads this, tell her she was right. She always said love isn't measured by what we keep. It's measured by what we're willing to give away. I couldn't read any further. The words blurred beneath my tears. Karen quietly handed me a tissue. I accepted it. No pride remained between us. Only grief. Only truth. Only Daniel. Michael looked toward the church sanctuary. I spent years thinking my brother never trusted me. He wiped his eyes. The truth is, He trusted me enough to save me. No one corrected him, because he was right. Daniel had trusted every member of his family. He simply loved them quietly. And as I closed the notebook, I realized we had uncovered only part of his legacy. There was still one place we hadn't looked: his personal journal, the one sitting inside the cedar chest at home, the one Daniel had never allowed anyone, including me, to read. Somehow, I knew the answers waiting inside those pages would be even harder to face than everything we had learned today. That evening, I returned to the house alone. For the first time in 22 years, no light waited for me in the kitchen. No smell of fresh coffee. No quiet voice asking, "How did your day go?" Only silence. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Daniel's boots still rested on the mat. His jacket still hung by the coat rack. Everything looked exactly as we had left it, except he was gone. I carried the black notebook and both unopened letters into our bedroom. The cedar chest stood at the foot of the bed. For years it had held the pieces of our past: uniforms, old photographs, military patches, a folded American flag from Daniel's retirement ceremony, and one leather journal. The journal he never let me read. I knelt beside the chest. My hands hesitated over the brass latch. "I hope you're ready for me to know," I whispered. Then I opened it. The familiar smell of cedar filled the room. Everything was arranged neatly, exactly as Daniel always kept it. His journal rested on top, dark brown leather, edges worn smooth by years of use. I picked it up carefully. Inside the front cover, he had written only one sentence: "If you're reading this, I finally ran out of time." My heart tightened. I turned the page. The first entries dated back nearly 20 years. Most were short, not dramatic, not poetic. Simple observations. Today I laughed for the first time in weeks. Susan says healing begins when someone feels safe enough to smile. I think she's right. I smiled through tears. That sounded exactly like him. Another page. Shoulder still hurts. Susan pretends not to notice when I struggle opening jars. She always loosens them first. She thinks I don't know. I laughed softly. He knew. Of course he knew. Every small act of love had never escaped him. The pages continued. Some described ordinary life. "We planted tomatoes today." Susan beat me at Scrabble again. I still think she cheats. She absolutely did not cheat. He simply hated losing. Then the entries slowly became heavier. Couldn't sleep. Same dream. Same explosion. Susan stayed awake beside me until sunrise. Never complained. Another page. Saw 3 empty chairs at church today. Thought about the families of the men we lost. I still remember every name. The guilt had never left. Not once. Yet nowhere did he blame anyone else. Only himself. Hours passed as I kept reading. Eventually, I reached an entry written shortly after one of Linda's surgeries. Mom called today. She thanked Medicare. I didn't correct her. She deserves peace more than she needs the truth. My eyes filled again. Then another. Michael finally smiled today. Worth every dollar. He still thinks he solved everything himself. Good. That's exactly how I wanted it. I closed my eyes. Daniel had measured success differently from everyone else. He didn't need recognition. He needed the people he loved to feel secure, even if they never knew why. Near the middle of the journal, I found an entry with my name covering almost the entire page. Susan worries too much. She thinks I don't notice when she skips buying new clothes because money is tight. She still wears the same winter coat from 8 years ago. Next Christmas, I'm buying her a new one, whether she likes it or not. I looked toward the closet. That coat still hung there. The new one never came. He hadn't lived long enough. I gently wiped my eyes before turning another page. This entry stopped me cold. I think my heart is getting weaker. The doctors aren't worried yet. Susan is pretending not to be worried. She's fooling everyone except me. I felt my chest tighten. I remembered that appointment. The cardiologist had called Daniel's condition manageable. We both wanted to believe him. Apparently, Daniel hadn't. Several pages later, the handwriting became slightly shakier. If this gets worse, I need to prepare. Not because I'm afraid to die. Because I'm afraid Susan will be alone. Tears rolled freely now. He had been planning for my future while I was busy trying to protect his. Then I found the page that shattered me. The date was only 2 months before he died. Today, I watched Susan repairing the porch steps herself. I offered to help. She smiled. Tired hearts shouldn't climb ladders. She thinks she's protecting me. She doesn't understand. She has spent our entire marriage protecting me. From my nightmares, from my guilt, from my pride, from myself. If anyone asks what courage looks like, it isn't a battlefield. It's waking up every morning beside someone carrying invisible wounds and loving them anyway. I couldn't stop crying. No medal, no military citation. Nothing anyone had said at the funeral came close to those words. Because they came from Daniel, the man who knew me better than anyone. Then I reached the final section of the journal. The pages had been written only weeks apart, each one shorter than the last. If you're reading this, Colonel Whitmore kept his promise. Thank you, James. The next page. Susan, if my family finally knows who you are, please don't let them feel ashamed forever. They judged what they never understood. Give them a chance. That sentence stayed with me. After everything, Daniel's greatest concern wasn't his reputation. It wasn't his medals. It wasn't his legacy. It was whether I could forgive the people who had hurt me. I turned to the final handwritten page. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Linda. Mom, you spent your whole life teaching me that family takes care of family. I listened. I hope someday you realize Susan has been taking care of ours since the day she married me. Please love her the way you loved me. She's earned it. By the time I finished reading, I could barely see the page. A knock echoed through the front door downstairs. I quickly wiped my eyes. Who could possibly be visiting tonight? I checked the clock. Almost 9. Another knock, this time louder. I walked downstairs and opened the door. Linda stood on the porch. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red from crying. In her hands, she carried a small cardboard box. I found this in Daniel's garage. She held it toward me. I think, her voice broke, I think it belongs to you. I looked inside. Every receipt, every canceled check, every financial record Daniel had hidden from me. And resting on top, a single sealed envelope, unlike the others. This one wasn't addressed to me. Across the front in Daniel's familiar handwriting were only 3 words. To my mother. Linda stared at it. I can't read it alone. Neither of us knew it yet, but the words inside that final letter would change Linda Carter forever. Linda stood in my living room with Daniel's letter trembling in her hands. Neither of us moved. The house was completely silent. Outside, rain continued falling against the windows. Inside, I could hear nothing except Linda's uneven breathing. She looked at the envelope again. I don't know if I can. You don't have to. I do. She slowly broke the seal. For several seconds, she simply stared at the folded pages. Then she looked at me. Will you read it? I nodded. If that's what you want. She handed me the letter. Her fingers were cold. I unfolded the pages carefully. Daniel's handwriting looked steadier than it had in the journal, almost as if he wanted these words to remain strong. I began reading. Dear Mom, if you're reading this, it means Susan decided you deserve to know everything. Linda immediately started crying. I continued. I've spent years trying to protect everyone I love. Sometimes that meant telling the truth. Sometimes it meant staying silent. I hope someday you'll understand the difference. Linda lowered her head. The next paragraph felt even heavier. Mom, please don't waste another minute blaming yourself. She looked up. What? I kept reading. You loved me the best way you knew how. You also judged Susan the best way you knew how. Neither came from cruelty. Both came from fear. Linda covered her mouth. Daniel understood her better than anyone. He wasn't accusing her. He was explaining her. The letter continued. I know you worried someone would take advantage of me. I know Dad taught us to protect what we worked for. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that love isn't something you protect. It's something you give, Linda whispered. Oh, Danny. Tears streamed down her face. I continued reading. Susan never wanted anything I owned. She wanted me. When I couldn't sleep, she stayed awake. When my shoulder hurt, she buttoned my shirts without making me feel weak. When my heart began failing, she quietly carried the fear I refused to admit. I stopped for a moment. Those memories came rushing back. Every doctor's appointment, every prescription. Every night, I waited until Daniel fell asleep before crying alone in the kitchen. Linda reached for my hand. I squeezed hers gently. Then I continued. There is something else you should know. My heart skipped. This wasn't in the journal. When my cardiologist first recommended surgery, Susan wanted to sell our house. Linda looked shocked. What? I kept reading. She never told you because she knew I would refuse. She secretly met with a realtor anyway. She said houses could be replaced. Husbands couldn't. Linda turned toward me. Is that true? I nodded quietly. I never listed it. Daniel found out before I signed anything. She stared at me as though seeing me for the first time. You would have sold your home without hesitation. Linda broke down completely. She covered her face and sobbed. I waited. Sometimes people need silence more than comfort. After several minutes, she whispered, I called you a gold digger. I didn't answer, because it was true. She had. Daniel's letter continued. Mom, if Susan is sitting beside you while you read this, please do something for me. Linda looked at me. What? I read the next sentence slowly. Treat her the way you would have wanted someone to treat me if our places had been reversed. Linda's shoulders shook. I failed him? No, I answered softly. You just didn't know. But I should have. Her voice cracked. I never asked. That sentence lingered between us. She was right. No one in the family had ever truly asked about me. Not where I came from, not what I had lived through, not what Daniel and I meant to each other. They had decided who I was before giving me a chance to speak. The final paragraph waited. I continued reading. If forgiveness is possible, I hope Susan gives it. If forgiveness isn't possible, I'll understand. But I know her. She'll probably forgive you anyway. Despite everything, I smiled. That sounded exactly like Daniel. The letter ended with only 3 words. Love each other. No signature. None was needed. Linda reached for the letter. She pressed it against her chest. I don't deserve this. I looked at her quietly. None of us deserve grace. That's why it's called grace. She nodded through tears. A knock interrupted us. This time I knew who it would be. Michael. When I opened the door, he stood there alone. His eyes were swollen. I need to talk. He noticed Linda immediately. You've read it? She nodded. Michael looked at me. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Daniel. He laughed bitterly. I spent years believing he thought I was irresponsible. I shook my head. He thought you were worth saving. Michael wiped his eyes. I found something. He held up an old key. I was cleaning out the shop. It was taped underneath Dad's old workbench. My stomach tightened. A key. I think it belongs to Daniel. I recognized it immediately, the small storage unit Daniel rented years earlier. I'd forgotten it even existed. We hadn't visited it in years. What do you think is inside? Michael asked. I remembered Daniel mentioning it once. Just old things. He had smiled when he said it. Now I wasn't so sure. Linda looked at the key. Should we go tomorrow? I hesitated. Something told me that whatever waited inside that storage unit, Daniel had intended us to find. Eventually, not immediately, not years later, exactly now. I looked at both of them. Tomorrow morning. Michael nodded. As he turned to leave, he suddenly stopped. Susan. Yes. I'm sorry. He looked directly into my eyes. For every cold conversation, for every holiday I made uncomfortable, for believing lies instead of asking questions. I can't change any of it. His voice broke. But if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life trying. I stepped forward. Without saying a word, I hugged him. For a second he froze. Then he hugged me back. The first real embrace we'd ever shared. Daniel would have smiled. As Michael drove away, I locked the front door and looked once more at the small brass key resting in my hand. Whatever waited behind that storage unit door would be the last secret my husband ever kept. And somehow, I already knew it wouldn't be about money, or medals, or war. It would be about the future he had quietly prepared. For all of us. The next morning arrived gray and quiet. None of us spoke much during the drive. I sat behind the wheel. Linda occupied the passenger seat. Michael followed in his truck. Karen came with him. Colonel Whitmore had declined my invitation. This part belongs to the family, he had said. For the first time, I believed he was right. The storage facility stood on the edge of town. Rows of metal doors stretched across the property. Daniel had rented Unit 214 for almost 12 years. I had completely forgotten about it. The manager recognized the key immediately. He always paid on time, the older man said. Quiet fellow. Never caused trouble. That sounded like Daniel. He unlocked the gate. The rest was up to us. I walked slowly toward Unit 214. The brass key felt strangely heavy in my hand. Linda stood beside me. You ready? No. I smiled sadly. But let's find out what he wanted us to see. The lock clicked. The metal door groaned as I lifted it. Dust floated through the morning light. The unit wasn't full. In fact, it was surprisingly organized. Shelving lined one wall. Plastic storage bins filled another. A workbench stood in the corner. Everything carried neat handwritten labels. Military, home, taxes, memories. Daniel had planned this place as carefully as everything else in his life. Michael looked around. I expected junk. So did I admitted. Karen noticed something first. There are photo albums? She picked one up carefully. Inside were dozens of pictures. Not from the army, from family gatherings, Christmas dinners, birthdays, fishing trips. Many included Linda. Some showed Michael as a teenager. Others showed Daniel's father before he became ill. Daniel had quietly preserved memories everyone else had forgotten. Linda smiled through tears. I thought these were all lost. They're not, I said. They're exactly where Daniel wanted them. Michael opened another box. Inside lay old business records from Carter Auto Supply, tax documents, equipment warranties, photographs of the first shop. Then he stopped. There are letters. Each envelope carried a family member's name. Dad, Mom, Michael, Karen, Susan. I counted 5 in total. Karen looked surprised. I thought we'd already found all the letters. So did I. Before anyone reached for them, another object caught my attention. A blue 3-ring binder rested alone on the workbench. Its cover read, Family Trust. I frowned. I don't remember this. Michael walked over. Neither do I. Inside sat neatly organized legal documents. Not military papers, not bank records, estate planning, insurance information, property deeds. Then we found the will, Daniel's final will. Michael looked at me. I thought the attorney was reading it tomorrow. So did I. Attached to the front was a note. To Attorney Thomas Reynolds. Please present only the signed original. This copy is for my family's understanding, if they find it first. Linda looked confused. So he expected us to come here? I nodded slowly. He planned every step. Karen carefully turned another page. Her expression changed instantly. Oh. Michael leaned closer. What? She looked at me. Susan? It's exactly what Colonel Whitmore said. I took the document. Daniel's estate was clearly outlined. The numbers surprised me. Not because they were enormous. Because they weren't. Daniel had spent so much of his money helping others that far less remained than anyone imagined. Karen whispered, I thought... She stopped herself. You thought what? I thought there would be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Michael gave a bitter smile. So did I. There wasn't. Most of Daniel's savings had already gone into helping his family. Then I reached the final section. Distribution of assets. I read slowly, Our home to Susan Miller. I expected that. The truck to Michael Carter. The family photographs and historical records to Linda Carter. Personal woodworking tools to Karen Carter. Karen blinked. Me. I smiled. You always admired his furniture. She nodded quietly. I did. Then came the largest entry. Remaining financial assets. To the Carter Military Family Assistance Foundation. Michael frowned. What foundation? There isn't one. Linda looked confused. There wasn't. I turned the page. The next paragraph explained everything. Upon my passing, I direct Attorney Thomas Reynolds to establish the Carter Military Family Assistance Foundation. Its purpose shall be to provide emergency financial support for military families facing medical hardship, housing crises, or unexpected loss. My heart pounded. Daniel wasn't leaving money to people. He was leaving hope. Karen whispered, He gave everything away. No, I answered softly. He gave it forward. Michael looked thoughtful. He always said someone helped him once. I guess this was his way of repaying it. Another handwritten note rested beneath the legal language. If Susan agrees to lead this foundation, I know it will help more people than I ever could alone. I closed my eyes. There it was. Daniel's final request. Not spoken, not demanded, simply trusted. Linda touched my arm. "What are you thinking?" I looked around the storage unit, at the photographs, the letters, the carefully labeled boxes, then back at Daniel's handwriting. I'm thinking he was still taking care of people, even after he knew he was dying. Linda nodded. He never stopped. Michael leaned against the workbench. I don't deserve what he did for me. Neither do I, Linda whispered. Karen looked at me. What about you? I smiled sadly. I never wanted his money. I know. No. She shook her head. I mean, she looked toward the binder. He trusted you with his dream. That sentence settled deeply inside me. Not his money. His dream. Suddenly, the storage unit no longer felt like a place where old things had been hidden. It felt like a bridge between Daniel's life and whatever came next. Michael picked up the envelope with his name. Should we read these? I looked at the others. Linda held hers. Karen held hers. Mine rested quietly in my hands. I nodded. I think that's why he left them. We stood together inside that small storage unit. 4 people whose lives had all been changed by the same man. Slowly, we opened our letters. None of us spoke. Only the sound of paper unfolding filled the room. Within seconds, I heard Linda begin crying. Karen covered her mouth. Michael stared at his page as if it had stolen his breath. I looked down at my own letter. The first sentence was enough to stop my heart. Susan, I need one last promise from you. And somehow, I already knew that keeping this final promise would change the rest of my life. I unfolded Daniel's final letter with trembling hands. Everything around me disappeared. The storage unit, the shelves, the boxes, even the people standing beside me. For a moment, it was just Daniel and me again. His handwriting was steady, confident, as though he knew I would eventually find these words. Dear Susan, if you've reached this letter, then you've already done something I hoped you would. You stayed. A tear slipped down my cheek. He knew me so well. He knew there would be moments when running away would seem easier. I kept reading. You've spent most of your life helping people survive. Now I need you to help them live. I looked up briefly. The others remained quietly reading their own letters. None of us interrupted one another. I continued. The foundation isn't my dream anymore. It's yours. You understand military families in a way most people never will. You know what it means to wait beside hospital beds. You know what silence sounds like after deployment. You know that the hardest battles often begin after soldiers come home. My throat tightened. Every sentence felt like Daniel was sitting beside me. You once told me something I'll never forget. People don't need heroes. They need someone who refuses to leave. I smiled through tears. I had forgotten saying those words. Apparently Daniel never had. He continued. So, don't build another monument. Build another chance. Help widows. Help children. Help aging veterans. Help parents who receive impossible phone calls. Help anyone carrying invisible wounds. That's the only legacy I'd ever want. I lowered the letter. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. Daniel hadn't left me instructions. He had left me purpose. Across the room, I heard Linda quietly sobbing. Michael placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Karen wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. Eventually, Linda folded her letter and looked toward me. He forgave me. I nodded. I know. He thanked me. She laughed through tears. After everything, I expected anger. Instead, he thanked me for raising him. I smiled softly. That sounds like Daniel. She nodded. It really does. Michael slowly folded his own letter. He told me something. His voice cracked. He said failure doesn't define a man. What he does after failure does. He shook his head. I needed to hear that 15 years ago. Karen finally spoke. He wrote to me too. She smiled sadly. He said, "Stop measuring wealth by what you own. Measure it by who feels safer because you exist." She laughed quietly. I don't think anyone has ever spoken to me that honestly. I looked around the storage unit. Daniel somehow knew exactly what each of us needed. Not praise, truth, wrapped in love. Michael suddenly noticed another small envelope tucked beneath the binder. This wasn't here before. He handed it to me. The front simply read, Attorney Reynolds. I frowned. Maybe we should leave that sealed. Michael nodded immediately. You're right. We'll give it to him. That afternoon, we drove together to Attorney Thomas Reynolds' office. He greeted us warmly. I wasn't expecting all of you. I placed the envelope on his desk. We found this. His eyebrows lifted. So, he smiled gently. You found the storage unit. You knew. Daniel's attorney nodded. He made me promise not to mention it unless none of you ever discovered it. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single handwritten page. He read silently for several moments, then looked up. Well? What? I asked. He smiled. This explains why Daniel wasn't worried. My heart skipped. What do you mean? The attorney handed me the letter. It contained only one instruction. If Susan accepts leadership of the foundation, cancel the backup plan. I frowned. Backup plan. Attorney Reynolds opened another folder from his desk. I suppose you're ready to hear the rest. He removed several incorporation papers. The Carter Military Family Assistance Foundation has already been legally established. All four of us stared at him. What? Linda whispered. The paperwork was completed 6 months ago. Michael blinked. Then why wait? Because Daniel hoped Susan would choose it freely. He pointed toward another document. If she declined, the foundation would transfer to a national veterans organization. I looked at Daniel's signature. He had truly thought of everything. Attorney Reynolds continued. He also arranged initial funding. Karen frowned. But there wasn't much money left. Not in his personal accounts. The attorney smiled. He anticipated that question. He opened another file. Daniel owned life insurance. My stomach tightened. I knew about one policy. There were two. He slid a document toward me. The total benefit exceeded $500,000. I stared in disbelief. He never told me. He specifically instructed me not to. Linda whispered, he wanted the charity funded. Exactly. Attorney Reynolds leaned back. He said Susan would understand why. I did, because Daniel never believed generosity should depend on comfort. It should depend on commitment. The attorney looked directly at me. So, the board needs its founding director. No one spoke. Not even me. After several moments, Linda reached across the desk and gently took my hand. You should do it. Michael nodded. Absolutely. Karen smiled. He already chose the right person. I looked down at Daniel's letter once more. Build another chance. The words echoed inside me. For years after leaving the army, I had convinced myself my purpose had ended. Now, I realized it had only changed. I looked at Attorney Reynolds. "When do we begin?" He smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask." He handed me one final folder. Across the cover was printed, "Founding Director, Susan Miller." I held it carefully. Not because it was important, because it represented something Daniel believed long before I did. That my life still had another mission. And this time, no battlefield, no gunfire, no explosions. Only people who desperately needed someone willing to stand beside them. Exactly the way Daniel had once stood beside me. 3 months passed faster than I expected. Grief never disappeared. It simply learned how to walk beside me instead of standing in my way. Every morning, I unlocked the front door of a small office that had once been an empty insurance building on Main Street. Now, a simple sign hung above the entrance, the Carter Military Family Assistance Foundation. The name still caught me by surprise. Every time I read it, I smiled. Daniel would have hated seeing his own name on a building. Then again, he would have loved seeing people walk through the front door. The first week, only 2 families came. One needed help paying rent after a National Guard deployment. Another needed transportation for a wounded veteran's rehabilitation appointments. We helped both. Not because we had endless money, because Daniel had taught me something. Sometimes people need someone to say yes before they lose hope. Word spread quickly. By the second month, volunteers began arriving. Retired nurses, former soldiers, church members, neighbors, people who had heard Daniel's story, or mine, or both. Then something happened that surprised me more than anything else. Linda walked through the front door carrying a cardboard box. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She smiled nervously. "I brought coffee." I laughed. "You don't have to bring coffee to volunteer." "I'm volunteering." She sounded genuinely surprised. "If you'll have me." I walked around the desk and hugged her. "I'd love that," she cried, again. We both seemed to do that a lot these days. Soon she became the first person every visitor met. She welcomed military spouses, comforted anxious parents, held babies while paperwork was completed. Sometimes she simply listened. She had become very good at listening. One afternoon, I overheard her speaking with a young woman whose husband had recently returned from overseas. "He barely sleeps." The young wife looked exhausted. "He doesn't talk." Linda nodded gently. "My son was like that." The woman looked surprised. "What helped?" Linda smiled sadly. "Someone loved him patiently." Then she looked toward me. I watched her do it. I pretended not to hear, but those words stayed with me all day. Michael changed too. Every Saturday morning, he arrived before anyone else. He repaired broken furniture, fixed shelves, installed new lighting. Whenever something needed doing, he simply handled it. One day, I noticed him writing a check. "What is that?" He smiled awkwardly. "My first donation." "You don't have to." "I know." He handed me the envelope. "I want to." Inside was more money than I expected. He noticed my surprise. "The shop's finally doing well." I figured. He smiled softly. "It's time someone else gets the chance Daniel gave me." I squeezed his shoulder. "He'd be proud of you." Michael looked away quickly. "I hope so." Karen surprised everyone, especially herself. She organized fundraising dinners, community auctions, holiday toy drives for military children. One evening, she laughed while carrying folding tables across the hall. "I spent years chasing expensive things." She shook her head. "This feels better." "It does," She smiled. I think Daniel knew that before I did. Perhaps the biggest surprise came 6 months after the foundation opened. Colonel Whitmore visited. He quietly walked through every room, spoke with veterans, thanked volunteers, then stopped beside my office door. You've exceeded every expectation. I laughed. No, we're just getting started. He nodded approvingly. I was hoping you'd say that. He reached into his briefcase. I brought something. Inside rested a framed certificate. The Department of the Army, Community Service Recognition, presented to the Carter Military Family Assistance Foundation. I stared at it. You shouldn't have. We didn't. He smiled. The recommendation came from military families you've helped. That meant more than any medal. Far more. Weeks later, Linda and I were sorting donated winter coats when she suddenly stopped. Susan? Yes. I need to ask you something. Anything. She hesitated. Can you forgive me? I looked at her carefully. She wasn't asking casually. She truly wanted to know. I've already forgiven you. You have. Long ago. She frowned. But after everything, I smiled. I learned forgiveness from your son. She began crying again. I'm going to stop apologizing one day. I laughed. I'll believe that when I see it. We both laughed together. For the first time, it felt effortless. Christmas arrived. The foundation hosted a dinner for military families. More than 100 people attended. Children filled the building with laughter. Veterans shared stories. Spouses exchanged phone numbers. No one felt alone. Near the end of the evening, Michael quietly handed me a small package. Open it. Inside was a brand new winter coat, dark blue, exactly my size. I stared at it in confusion. Michael smiled. We found your old coat. Karen laughed. It should have retired years ago. Linda gently touched the sleeve. Daniel would have wanted you warm. I couldn't speak, only cry. Again. As everyone hugged me, I suddenly understood. Daniel hadn't disappeared. His kindness had simply spread into the people around him. 1 year earlier, these same people barely accepted me. Now, they had become my family. Later that evening, after everyone left, I locked the office and stood alone beneath the foundation sign. Snow had begun falling, soft, peaceful. I looked up at the building, then whispered into the quiet night. We did it, Daniel. A gentle breeze stirred the American flag outside. Maybe it was only the wind. Maybe not. Either way. I smiled, because for the first time since losing him, the future no longer frightened me. There was still one thing left to do. One final visit. One final goodbye. And one final salute that neither Daniel nor I could have ever imagined. 1 year after Daniel's funeral, I stood in front of his headstone with a bouquet of white lilies in my hands. The morning air was cool. A gentle breeze moved through the rows of American flags placed beside veterans' graves. It was Memorial Day. The cemetery was quieter than I expected. People spoke in whispers. Children walked carefully. Some visitors cried openly. Others simply stood in silence. I preferred silence. Linda stood beside me. She looked healthier than she had in years. Grief had changed her, not by making her weaker, by making her kinder. Michael and Karen stood a few steps behind us. Neither carried flowers. Instead, they brought something Daniel would have appreciated, a toolbox. Every Memorial Day, they volunteered to repair damaged benches and fences throughout the veterans section of the cemetery. Michael had started the tradition. Karen never missed a year. Daniel would have smiled. I knelt before the headstone, The engraved words caught the morning sunlight. Daniel Carter, beloved husband, faithful friend. I gently placed the lilies beneath his name. I kept my promise, I whispered. The foundation is doing well. I smiled. You were right. People really did need another chance. I almost laughed. You probably knew that before I did. Behind me, Linda quietly wiped away tears. She no longer tried to hide them. None of us did. Grief had become something we shared instead of something we carried alone. The foundation had changed all of us. In 1 year, we had helped more than 300 military families. We paid emergency rent, covered medical bills, provided counseling, bought groceries, repaired homes, funded scholarships for children who had lost military parents. Every time we helped someone, I imagined Daniel standing quietly nearby, never asking for recognition, only hoping someone else felt a little less alone. A little after noon, we prepared to leave. Then we heard footsteps approaching. Several young soldiers entered the cemetery. They wore modern Army combat uniforms, probably stationed nearby. Each carried small American flags. They quietly placed them beside veterans' graves. One of the soldiers glanced toward us, then looked again. His eyes widened. He whispered something to the others. They stopped walking. I assumed they had mistaken me for someone else. It happened occasionally after the newspaper published an article about the foundation. I smiled politely. The youngest soldier stepped closer. Excuse me, ma'am. Yes. Are you? He hesitated. Captain Susan Miller. For a moment, 25 years disappeared. I smiled. I was. The young soldier immediately straightened. So were you the Captain Miller? I laughed softly. I suppose that depends who's asking. He smiled nervously. My commanding officer talks about Operation Cedar Valley. He says it's still studied during medical leadership training. I stared at him. After all these years, he nodded. They told us about the officer who refused to abandon civilians. I looked down. I wasn't alone. No, ma'am. He smiled. But they always say one thing. What? They say? He stood a little straighter. If you ever meet Captain Susan Miller, thank her. Before I could answer, he came to attention. A perfect military salute. Every soldier behind him immediately did the same. 5 young soldiers, standing perfectly still, saluting me. My eyes filled with tears. Slowly, I returned the salute. Not because of rank, not because of medals, because respect deserves respect. When I lowered my hand, none of them moved. Finally, the youngest soldier spoke. Thank you for your service, ma'am. I smiled. Thank you for yours. He hesitated. We also wanted to thank Sergeant First Class Daniel Carter. He looked toward the headstone. Our instructor said none of those civilians would have survived without him. For a second, none of us spoke. Then, one by one, every soldier turned toward Daniel's grave. They saluted him too. Linda gasped quietly. Her hand covered her mouth. Michael's eyes filled with tears. Karen openly cried. For years, Linda had believed no one would ever know who her son really was. Now, complete strangers honored him, not because he sought recognition, because he earned respect. After the soldiers quietly walked away, none of us moved. Finally, Linda stepped forward. She looked at Daniel's headstone. Then, to my complete surprise, she turned toward me, very slowly, very carefully. She stood perfectly straight, raised her hand, and gave me a salute. It wasn't perfect. She had never served. Her hand shook. The angle wasn't quite right. None of that mattered. Michael saw what she had done, without hesitation. He saluted too. Karen followed. 3 civilians, standing in a military cemetery, doing the best salute they knew how. I couldn't stop crying. I returned every one of them. Not because I deserved it, because I understood what they were really saying. We see you now. We know who you are. You belong to this family. Linda lowered her hand. I should have saluted you a year ago. I gently shook my head. No. She smiled through tears. This was the right day. Maybe she was right, because this salute wasn't about my past. It wasn't about Afghanistan, or medals, or rank. It was about healing, about forgiveness, about finally seeing one another clearly. We stood together for a long time. No one hurried us. No one interrupted. As we walked back toward our cars, I looked over my shoulder one final time. The lilies rested quietly beneath Daniel's name. The small American flags moved gently in the breeze. For the first time since losing him, I didn't say goodbye. Instead, I smiled. See you later. Because people like Daniel never truly leave. They continue living inside every life they quietly changed, every family they protected, every stranger they helped, every act of kindness inspired by their example. The first salute at Daniel's funeral had revealed a secret. The last salute at his grave revealed something far greater. His greatest legacy had never been his military service. It had been teaching all of us that true honor isn't measured by medals, rank, or recognition. It's measured by how many lives become stronger because you chose to love them. And that is the legacy I will carry for the rest of my life. After losing Daniel, I thought grief would be the final chapter of my life. I believed the most meaningful part of my story had ended the day I stood beside his grave. But I learned something I never expected. Love doesn't disappear when someone dies. It changes form. Sometimes it becomes courage. Sometimes it becomes forgiveness. Sometimes it becomes the quiet decision to keep helping others, even when your own heart is still healing. For many years, Daniel and I believed the greatest acts of kindness should remain unseen. We never wanted applause. We never wanted recognition. Looking back, I still believe humility is a beautiful thing, but I also understand something else now. When people witness genuine compassion, they often become compassionate themselves. One act of kindness inspires another. One person choosing forgiveness can heal an entire family. One quiet sacrifice can echo through generations. I also learned that we should be careful before judging someone's story. We rarely know the battles another person has fought. The strongest people are often the ones carrying the heaviest burdens with the gentlest smiles. If someone you love is still here today, don't wait to tell them how much they matter. Spend the extra few minutes. Make the phone call. Give the hug. Say the words. Tomorrow is a promise none of us have been given. Daniel never became famous. Most people will never read his name in a history book. But because of the way he chose to love, forgive, and serve others, hundreds of families found hope when they needed it most. To me, that is what a meaningful life truly looks like. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. Have you ever known someone whose quiet kindness changed your life forever? Please share your story in the comments. I read as many as I can, and your words may encourage someone else who needs hope today. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more heartfelt stories about family sacrifice, forgiveness, and second chances. And before you go, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always amazing to see how people from so many different places come together through stories. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, take care of yourself and never underestimate the quiet power of kindness.